The moment she saw him step inside the community center, her breath caught in her throat. Sarah Bennett, clutching her worn leather bag, stayed hidden behind a line of parked cars. The boy, no, young man, moved with a familiar gait. Her heart whispered a name she hadn't spoken aloud in years: Noah. She pulled the photograph from her wallet, creased at the edges, colors fading. The face staring back at her was that of a 6-year-old boy with bright eyes and a mischievous grin. She looked up again. Same jawline, same eyes, but that was impossible. Her son had been missing for 13 years. Before following this journey, comment where you're watching from and hit the like button if this story touches your heart. Sarah Bennett didn't used to believe in fate. She believed in evidence, deadlines, the quiet buzz of scanners feeding headlines to her inbox. For 15 years, she'd worked as an investigative journalist, fearless, intuitive, and relentless. From conflict zones in the Middle East to political cover-ups in Washington, D.C., she had seen the best and worst of the human condition, armed with nothing but a notebook and a voice recorder. But everything changed on a gray August afternoon. Her son, Noah, had vanished without a sound from a public park in Arlington, Virginia. One minute he was feeding ducks by the lake, the next he was gone. No cries, no witnesses, just an empty juice box and a single abandoned sneaker. Sarah had looked away for 2 minutes to answer a phone call she never forgave herself for taking. The case made the news for weeks. Amber alerts, press conferences, tear-streaked interviews. Her colleagues wrote sympathetic stories. Volunteers canvassed neighborhoods. But nothing ever turned up. It was as if Noah had been swallowed by the earth. In the months that followed, Sarah quit her job, divorced her husband, and moved to a small 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of Cambridge, Massachusetts. The only writing she did now were letters to Noah, one each year on his birthday, sealed and saved in a shoebox at the back of her closet. She didn't light candles. She didn't host memorials. Because Sarah didn't grieve the way others told her to. She wasn't ready to call it death, not without proof. She survived by shrinking her world, teaching part-time workshops at a local literacy nonprofit, organizing closets, walking the same trail every morning before the city woke up. She avoided playgrounds. She avoided the mirror. And yet, even after 13 years, she could still hear Noah's laugh in certain wind gusts. Still dreamt of his tiny hand wrapped around hers. Still woke at 2:13 a.m., the exact time he went missing. Her fridge was covered in magnets from places she'd investigated over the years, but none of them mattered anymore. The only thing she wanted to uncover was a truth no one else seemed to believe in, that her son was still alive. People stopped asking after year 5. The reporters stopped calling. Even the detectives closed the file. Insufficient evidence? Presumed deceased. But Sarah kept digging, visiting online forums, scanning anonymous tips, attending support groups under fake names, just to gather fragments of similar cases. She became obsessed with patterns, age, gender, abduction method, missing time gaps, and so when she saw the young man at the community center that rainy Thursday, smiling gently at the receptionist, carrying a stack of donated books, her entire body reacted before her mind could. It wasn't just resemblance, it was recognition. He moved like Noah, blinked like Noah, bit the inside of his lip when nervous, just like Noah used to do when asked to read aloud in front of strangers. Sarah stepped back behind the car door, heart pounding in her ears. She had chased ghosts before. False alarms. Misremembered faces. But this one felt different. This one felt like fate. Sarah's apartment sat above a used bookstore on a quiet street where nothing ever happened. The ceilings leaked in the spring, the radiators groaned in winter. But she liked it that way. There was something oddly comforting about the imperfection. Something human. Every morning, she brewed her coffee in silence, letting the aroma fill the small kitchen. She'd toast a single slice of sourdough, the same breakfast Noah used to beg for, crusts removed. She didn't eat much anymore, but rituals mattered. They kept her anchored. Her walls were mostly bare. No framed photos, no decorations, just books stacked in neat, compulsive piles. True crime, behavioral psychology, missing persons cases. In the far corner, a corkboard hung heavy with printouts, maps marked in red ink, articles yellowed with time, stills from surveillance footage long deemed irrelevant. Sarah's private war room. She volunteered at the Cambridge Literacy Project twice a week, teaching adults how to read. Most of them came from rough places. recovering addicts, immigrants, women who'd escaped shelters with nothing but their children. Sarah never told them her story. She listened, she taught. She let the hours pass in quiet service, and in doing so, she stayed out of her own mind. But the nights were different. Every evening before bed, she opened the shoebox. Inside were 13 letters, each one written on the same stationery, blue-lined paper from the same pad she had bought the week after Noah disappeared. The first was filled with rage. Why didn't he scream? Why didn't she see? By the third letter, the rage softened into longing. By the seventh, she was promising him the stars if he could just find his way home. The most recent was written just 2 weeks ago on his 19th birthday. Dear Noah, if you're out there, I need you to know I never stopped looking, even when they all said I should. I don't know what kind of life you've had. I only hope it was one with kindness. I hope if you see someone who feels like home, you'll remember me, even if only as a feeling. She never mailed them. Who would she address them to? Sometimes, in her weaker moments, she considered turning them over to the police as evidence of mental instability. Maybe they'd finally lock her up, put her in a place where memories couldn't hurt anymore. But then she'd think of Noah, his real name, not just the empty file number in a system that had long since given up, and she'd keep going. Sarah knew she was the punchline to a quiet joke among former colleagues. The brilliant reporter turned ghost hunter, obsessed with a case colder than January frost. But none of them had stood at the edge of a lake holding an empty sneaker. She'd tried to move on. She really had. There were relationships after the divorce, a few moments of laughter, even fleeting intimacy. But every man eventually tired of her late-night obsessions, the stack of old clippings, the invisible, visible weight in her voice. None of them understood. No one ever stayed. But that Thursday, in the wet light of a gray Boston morning, all her years of grief, doubt, and stubborn faith folded into one trembling certainty. He was here. He was alive. And Sarah Bennett was about to find out what had happened to her son. It wasn't the kind of place she usually went. A community fundraiser held at a high school gymnasium. Fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, fold-out tables lined with raffle baskets and lukewarm cider. But the nonprofit she worked for had set up a small booth, and Sarah had agreed, more out of habit than interest. She kept mostly to herself, handing out brochures and answering the occasional question about adult literacy classes. Her eyes drifted often, watching the crowd, not for potential students, but out of an instinct she could never turn off. That's when she saw the video. A projector played a looping slideshow near the stage, snapshots of local teens volunteering, organizing coat drives, tutoring elementary kids. The crowd barely noticed it, but Sarah's attention snagged the moment a face flickered on screen. She blinked, then moved closer. The young man couldn't have been older than 19. Light brown hair, tall frame, quiet smile. He was standing next to a table of books, wearing a navy hoodie with the school's logo. It was the eyes that caught her. Something in the shape, the distance between them. A softness that twisted her stomach into a knot. The video looped again. She watched him move. Just a few seconds of footage, handing a stack of novels to a smaller child, then laughing at something just out of frame. The sound was muted, but Sarah didn't need to hear it. She felt it. She leaned over the table to the event coordinator, a teenage girl in a volunteer shirt with glitter on her cheeks. "The boy in that video?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice level. "Do you know his name?" The girl smiled brightly. "Oh, that's Jacob Fairchild. He's a student at Stoughton Prep. Super sweet. Always helps at these things." Jacob. The name meant nothing. But the face, God, the face, sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. She nodded her thanks and walked away, fighting to keep her breathing steady. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone. At a quiet corner near the bleachers, she searched Jacob Fairchild Stoughton Prep. A handful of posts surfaced, a school newspaper blurb, a scholarship listing, a tagged birthday photo on someone's Instagram, and there he was. Different angles, different smiles. But it was him. She clicked on one video taken just 2 months ago, Jacob speaking at a youth mentoring event. "I was adopted when I was a kid," he said into the microphone, voice soft but clear. "I don't remember much from before. But I'm lucky. My family gave me a second chance." Sarah's heart dropped. Adopted. Didn't remember much. She watched the rest of the clip in a fog. He thanked his dad, Alan Fairchild, a local businessman. He talked about community, finding belonging, giving back, all the things a normal teenager would say. But to Sarah, it sounded rehearsed, like something carefully planted. She closed the video and stared at the frozen image of Jacob's face. She couldn't be sure. Not yet, but a mother's instinct is ancient, deep, untouched by logic, and something in her had just awakened. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She sat hunched over her laptop in the dim glow of her desk lamp, the cursor blinking like a pulse on the search bar. Jacob Fairchild. She typed the name again and again, digging through school pages, archived newsletters, tagged photos, and online yearbooks. What she found was spotless. Too spotless. The earliest record she could trace was dated June 2012, barely a month after Noah vanished. A blurry church bulletin in a local archive announcing, "Welcome our new blessing, Jacob Fairchild, adopted son of Alan Fairchild." There was no mention of a prior identity, no file, no court listing available online. Just a boy who appeared out of nowhere and slid perfectly into a new life. Sarah leaned back in her chair, mind racing. That timeline, it was too close, too convenient. The Fairchild family lived just 2 towns over in a quiet suburb called Dover. Alan Fairchild was listed as a regional director for a technology company. Widowed, no previous children, no mention of an adoption agency. Her journalist instincts took over. She pulled up the Massachusetts Department of Health's online registry. No records for a Jacob Fairchild born locally. No adoption filings she could trace. She scribbled a note on her pad. Noah Bennett, missing June 3rd, 2012. Jacob Fairchild appears June 30th, 2012. A gap of 27 days. Her breath caught in her chest. She opened a folder on her desktop labeled Noah Archive. Inside were hundreds of files, images, and scanned documents she hadn't touched in months. One photo stood out. It was taken 2 weeks before Noah disappeared. He was grinning with a front tooth missing, holding a library card in one hand and a dog-eared copy of Charlotte's Web in the other. Sarah looked at that gap-toothed smile, then pulled up a screenshot from the video she'd watched earlier of Jacob at the mentoring event. Same dimple, same crooked incisor on the right. She enlarged both images and aligned them side by side on her screen. A mother's eye doesn't forget, not when it's burned into her bones. She felt her throat tighten, her fingers grip the sides of the desk. Jacob might not remember, but she did. Then came the hesitation. What if she was wrong again? Over the years, there had been others. False alarms. Boys that looked close enough. One time she even followed a child into a department store west only to discover a completely different mother waiting at the checkout line. It had taken her weeks to forgive herself for the shame. But this felt different. Jacob had said he didn't remember his early years. That meant someone had either wiped his memory or he'd been taught not to ask questions. Sarah knew she couldn't walk into his life like a ghost. She needed answers first. Proof. And she knew exactly where to start. The Fairchilds. If Alan Fairchild had taken in a boy with no traceable past, no legal trail, then somewhere, buried under false records or sealed files, was a truth begging to be unearthed. Sarah closed her laptop slowly. She had followed stories into war zones and across continents, but this would be the hardest story of all, because this time, the truth might not just change her life, it might give it back. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss more real stories that reach the deepest corners of emotion. The day Noah vanished had begun like any other. It was the first Saturday of summer, the kind where the air buzzed with lazy heat and sprinklers hissed across front lawns. Sarah remembered holding his little hand as they walked to Harmony Park, a routine mother-son outing just a few blocks from home. He was 6 then, wild with questions and bursting energy, insisting on bringing his plastic binoculars and his favorite red cap. The cap was never found. They'd stopped near the duck pond. Sarah had taken a phone call from a colleague, something about a whistleblower she was supposed to interview the following week. She remembered turning her back for just under 2 minutes. When she looked again, Noah was gone. At first, she thought he'd wandered into the trees behind the benches, maybe chasing a bird or trying to sneak a frog into his backpack the way he had the week before. She called his name, calmly at first, then louder, then screaming. Other parents helped. The park ranger radioed for assistance, Police arrived within minutes, but by then the world had already shifted beneath her feet. Noah was nowhere. The search expanded rapidly. Helicopters, scent dogs, drones, local news plastered his photo across every screen in the state. Missing Arlington boy, age 6. The grainy photo showed him with a toothless grin, wearing that same red cap and a superhero t-shirt. Sarah watched strangers hold candlelight vigils, whispering prayers and conspiracy theories with equal conviction. But despite the attention, no viable leads emerged. Security cameras in nearby stores had no footage. No witnesses remembered seeing a suspicious adult. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no footprints, only that damn juice box he'd begged for and left half crushed in the grass. A white utility van had been seen parked near the south lot, unusual for that part of town, but it left before the first officer arrived. No license plate recorded, no company logo, no suspects, no closure. By week 2, Sarah stopped sleeping. By week 4, she had wallpapered her kitchen with maps and time charts. Her husband Thomas had tried to keep her grounded, but eventually even he broke under the pressure. He wanted to grieve, to accept what seemed inevitable. Sarah refused, and when the grief turned into blame, their marriage shattered under its weight. But Sarah never let go. She had reported every tip, followed up on every false sighting. Once she'd flown to Kentucky because someone had seen a boy in a gas station bathroom who looked off. It wasn't Noah. It never was. And yet, somewhere deep in her gut, the mother in her screamed that he hadn't died, that he had been taken. The police had never officially ruled it a kidnapping. With no evidence of abduction, the case had remained open, but stagnant. The lead detective, Rick Harlow, eventually transferred to another department. He called Sarah once a year on the anniversary just to check in. It was always the same script, no new developments. Sarah had kept the case file anyway. Copies of everything, her own interviews, the van sighting, the scent dog reports, even the psychologist assessments of her own state of mind, which had once suggested obsessive grief behavior. She had underlined that in red. But even obsession had its purpose. Over the years, she'd gathered other stories, children who had been abducted but returned years later, often with no memory of who they had been. Children reprogrammed, renamed, rehomed by those who understood how easily a life could be rewritten if no one came looking. Except she had never stopped looking. Now, as Sarah sat at her dining table surrounded by the ghosts of her old files, a thought rose quietly through the chaos. What if Jacob Fairchild wasn't just some well-meaning teen with no memory? What if he was the ending to the story no one but her still believed was unfinished? In the early years, Sarah had tried to go through official channels. She sat across from endless officers, social workers, media liaisons, each with the same sympathetic gaze and slow nods that told her they were already mentally closing the file. But one person had always taken her seriously: Detective Eva Lansing. Eva had joined the Arlington PD just 6 months before Noah went missing. Young, sharp-eyed, and constantly underestimated, she was assigned to the case when most had already begun writing it off. Eva had no children of her own, but she treated the case with a kind of quiet fury Sarah had never forgotten. They lost contact after Eva left the force in 2016, citing ethical disagreements. Rumors suggested she'd clashed with a superior over the way certain cold cases were handled. After that, she vanished from public view. No social media, no forwarding address, until now. Sarah stared at the business card she had kept all these years, creased, faded, but still legible. Eva Lansing, private investigator. She hadn't dared call it before, maybe she hadn't been ready. But now, with Jacob's face burned into her mind, there was no other choice. Sarah dialed the number with trembling fingers. It rang 4 times before a curt voice answered. Lansing. There was a pause, then a slight inhale. Sarah? Yes. Another pause. Where have you been? Sarah swallowed. I think I've found him. Within 2 hours, they met at a coffee shop tucked beneath a brownstone building in Newton. Eva looked older, leaner. Her hair was shorter, streaked with silver at the temples, but her eyes were just as sharp, maybe sharper. Sarah laid out everything: Jacob's video, the church bulletin, the photographs, the timeline. Eva didn't flinch. She didn't interrupt. She took notes like a surgeon preparing for a complex procedure. Fairchild, Eva muttered, tapping the page. That name's come up before. Sarah blinked. What do you mean? There was a foster file I looked into years ago, Eva said, her voice lowering. Unusual transfer. Private adoption processed outside the normal state network, sealed records, expedited clearance. I could never get inside it. She looked up. Now I know why. Sarah exhaled, the air shaking from her chest. I need to know if Jacob is Noah, she said softly. Before I do anything, before I confront anyone. Eva nodded. Then we start with verification. I can run a background sweep on the Fairchilds, find gaps in their paper trail, match medical details if we're lucky. If we get a DNA sample, we'll know for sure. And if it is him? Eva didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached across the table and touched Sarah's hand. Then we'll bring him home. Sarah had never let herself believe that sentence, not after all these years. But for the first time in over a decade, the idea no longer felt like delusion. It felt like a beginning. The first time Sarah saw Jacob up close, she was standing 6 feet away from him at a used bookstore. It wasn't an accident. Eva had tracked down his routine, quiet, consistent. He volunteered at the community center on Mondays and Wednesdays, worked part-time at the bookstore near Tremont Street on Fridays after school. A creature of habit, well-liked, unobtrusive, the kind of boy people didn't question. Sarah entered on a rainy Friday afternoon, her coat still damp, heart rattling in her chest like a faulty drum. She spotted him instantly, behind the counter scanning a stack of paperbacks with practiced ease, chatting quietly with a silver-haired man about first editions. Up close, his resemblance to Noah was even more haunting. Same arch in the eyebrows, same distant gaze when listening. And when he smiled politely, Sarah almost lost her balance. But she couldn't act yet. She couldn't afford another false hope. So she browsed and waited. When the store quieted, she approached the counter with a book she didn't care about, Of Mice and Men. Ironically, one she had read to Noah before bed the week he disappeared. Classic, Jacob said, offering her a modest smile. Still hits hard. Every time, she replied, willing her voice to stay calm. He scanned the book. You a Steinbeck fan? Used to be. My son loved him. He paused, just for a second. Oh, yeah. She nodded. He disappeared when he was 6. The words hung in the air like smoke. Heavy, uninvited. She hadn't meant to say them aloud, at least not yet. But Jacob looked up, and in his eyes, something flickered. Recognition? Or just discomfort? I'm sorry, he said softly. That must have been really hard. It still is, she said. You never stop wondering who they might have become. Silence. Then he bagged the book and handed it to her with both hands. She noticed a faint scar along his left wrist, Grinchfry, exactly where Noah had once cut himself falling off a bike. It was almost too much. Thank you, Jacob, she said, testing the name. He looked surprised. Do we know each other? Sarah smiled. No, just good with names. I saw you at the community event last week. Right, he said, still looking at her with a hint of curiosity. You teach, don't you? I used to, she lied. Now I just ask a lot of questions. He laughed, a quiet, slightly guarded sound. That can be dangerous. So can forgetting, she said. Another pause. I'm Sarah, she added. Nice to meet you. He nodded. Jacob, you know that already. I hope we talk again. As she turned and walked away, her knees nearly buckled from the weight of what had just happened. Her instincts were screaming. Something inside that boy recognized her, even if he didn't know why. She exited into the cold rain, heart pounding with fear, hope, and something else she hadn't dared feel in years. Momentum. Back in the car, she dialed Eva. I made contact. How did he react? Polite, thoughtful, curious. But Eva, Sarah's voice cracked. There's something in his eyes. It's like he's been taught to forget. Eva was silent for a moment. Then, that's how they survive, Sarah. That's how they're trained. Sarah gripped the steering wheel. Then we have to help him remember. They met again the following week, this time by coincidence that wasn't a coincidence. Sarah had enrolled in a local creative writing workshop at the community center after learning Jacob attended one on the same night. She wasn't sure if the course was real or just a convenient excuse, but by now, the line between intention and intuition had blurred. He noticed her the moment she walked in. You again, he said, a flicker of a smile playing at his lips. You following me? Sarah chuckled. Maybe I just like good books and bad coffee. He nodded at the vending machine in the corner. You've come to the right place. They sat in different circles that evening, but during the break, he wandered over with a half-empty paper cup in hand. So, your son, he said carefully. You said he disappeared? Sarah nodded, steadying her voice. 13 years ago. He hesitated. Can I ask what happened? He was with me, she said. In the park. I turned around for less than 2 minutes and he was gone. Jacob looked down into his coffee, swirling it absently. Do you think he's still alive? I have to, she answered, watching his reaction. If I stop believing, he disappears twice. He didn't respond. Not right away. But then he said something that made her breath catch. I used to have this dream when I was a kid. I was in a big place, like a field, and someone was calling my name. Not Jacob, another name. But I could never hear it clearly. Sarah's throat tightened. What did it sound like? He shrugged. He shrugged. Muffled. Like it started with an N, maybe, or an M. She wanted to scream, to reach out, to tell him, but she stayed still, because rushing would only push him away. Instead, she said quietly, names have power. Even when we forget them, they stay somewhere inside us. Jacob looked at her then, really looked, his gaze lingering just a second too long. I like talking to you, he said softly. It's weird, but it feels familiar. Sarah smiled through the ache in her chest. Me too. They talked every week after that, about books, about memory, about identity. Sarah never pushed. She let the bond grow naturally, like watering a seed she wasn't sure would bloom. And slowly, Jacob began to open up. He told her about his childhood, what little he remembered. Being told he was chosen, that his past didn't matter, that his real parents had given him up, that asking too many questions was ungrateful. Sarah's heart broke at every word, but she held her pain like a secret because this wasn't about her trauma, it was about his truth. One night, as they walked out of the center together, he stopped mid-step. You said your son's name was Noah, right? She froze. Yes. He blinked. That name, it's been stuck in my head since we first talked. I don't know why. Sarah's breath shook as she exhaled. Maybe you heard it somewhere before. Maybe, he said, but his voice was thin, distracted. He looked up at the sky as if trying to remember something lost in the stars. Then he whispered, almost to himself, I used to have a red hat. Sarah didn't answer. She couldn't. She just stood there, praying that memory would guide him the rest of the way home. It took 3 weeks for Eva to find what they needed, a hospital record. It was buried under the name Jacob F., but linked to a pediatric visit just 40 days after Noah's disappearance. The child had come in with a fever. The intake nurse had recorded a birthmark on the left hip, a small crescent shape, identical to the one Noah had since birth. A birthmark Sarah hadn't dared mention in any public record. A detail too personal, too sacred. It was the final piece. They had enough for a case, enough for a warrant. But Sarah didn't want to wait for the court system. She needed to look into the eyes of the man who had stolen her life. So she went to the house. It was a wide colonial home nestled on a quiet street in Dover, surrounded by trimmed hedges and a red brick walkway. The kind of house that looked incapable of hiding secrets. But Sarah knew better. She stood at the porch, heart pounding, and rang the bell. Alan Fairchild answered the door wearing a gray sweater and an easy smile that faltered the moment he saw her. Can I help you? Yes, she said. I think you already have. He blinked. Excuse me? She stepped forward. You may know me by a different name, Sarah Bennett. Something flickered across his face. Recognition? Panic? He quickly masked it with confusion. I'm not sure. I'm Noah Bennett's mother, she said, her voice calm but laced with steel. The boy you've been calling Jacob for 13 years. The silence between them was deafening. Then Alan stepped outside, gently closing the door behind him. You need to leave, he said quietly. Sarah didn't budge. No, you need to explain. I don't know what you think you're doing, but he has your last name, but he has my son's eyes. His scar, his birthmark, his memories are starting to come back. Alan's composure cracked then. Just a little. Enough. Sarah saw it, that flash of fear. You're wrong, he said, but softer now. You're confused. No, she said, I was confused for 13 years, but not anymore. He looked down at his shoes, then back up. I saved him, he said. The words hit her like a slap. You stole him. I gave him a life, Alan snapped. You think I didn't see the reports, the custody battle, the husband who walked out, the breakdown? What kind of life were you going to give him? Sarah took a slow step forward. You have no idea who I was, and you have no right to decide who deserved him. Alan's voice dropped to a near whisper. He cried for weeks. He had nightmares. I had to make him forget. He was breaking. Sarah's voice broke too. You broke him. For a moment, Alan looked very small, smaller than she ever expected. Not a monster, just a man with excuses. Then she said the words that shattered everything. We have DNA, and the police are coming. His face went pale. He deserves the truth, Sarah said, even if it destroys you. And then she turned away. As she reached the sidewalk, the front door behind her creaked open. Jacob stood there, backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked between them, confused, cautious. Sarah didn't speak. She just looked at him. And this time, he didn't look away. Jacob didn't say a word at first. He stood on the porch, frozen, watching Sarah walk down the front steps with tears in her eyes and fury in her bones. Alan behind him had gone utterly silent, his shoulders slumped, lips a thin line. The lie had collapsed, and now the silence left in its place was deafening. Jacob glanced between them again. "Dad?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Alan closed his eyes. Sarah turned at the bottom of the steps, meeting Jacob's eyes with a softness that hurt more than any scream could. "Your name is Noah," she said. "You were taken from me when you were 6. Jacob stared at her, unmoving. Alan stepped forward. "You don't have to listen to this, Jacob. She's confused. She's desperate." But the tone in his voice had shifted. It wasn't defensive. It was tired. Jacob's eyes narrowed, searching Alan's face. "Is it true?" Alan opened his mouth, closed it again. "Tell me the truth," Jacob said louder now. "Please." And there it was, a crack. Alan looked at Sarah, then back at Jacob. His voice broke when he finally spoke. "I didn't plan it, not at first, but I saw you at that park, so alone, crying. I thought maybe I could fix something, give you what I never had." "You told me they gave me up," Jacob whispered. "I had to." Alan's voice trembled. "You were scared. You woke up crying every night. You kept asking for someone named Sarah. I told you she couldn't come, that she didn't want to." Sarah gasped, a sound like a wound opening. Jacob took a step back, his face pale. "You lied to me, my entire life. I raised you," Alan said desperately. "I fed you, clothed you, loved you. You rewrote me." Jacob's voice cracked. "You made me forget who I was." Tears streamed down his face now. He turned to Sarah. "Is it true?" he asked, shaking. "Is my name Noah?" Sarah nodded slowly, eyes shimmering. "It always has been." He took another step toward her. "How did you know it was me?" Sarah let out a trembling breath. "Because I never stopped knowing, even when the world told me I was wrong, Hanshra. Even when your face grew older and your voice changed, I still knew. A mother always knows." Jacob's breathing became shallow, his hands trembling. "I don't remember anything. I don't remember you." "That's okay," she said gently. "You don't have to remember me right now. Just know I never stopped waiting for you." Behind them, Alan sank onto the steps. His silence was louder than any apology. Jacob stood there, torn between two lives, one built on lies and comfort, one buried in pain and love. "I don't know who I am anymore," he whispered. Sarah stepped forward, slowly, carefully. "That's okay too. We can figure it out together." He didn't move, but he didn't run. Sarah reached into her coat and pulled out a folded photo, the one she had carried for 13 years. The boy with the red cap, grinning at the camera. Jacob took it, studied it. He didn't say anything, but something in his eyes shifted. A spark. Recognition? Maybe. Or maybe just the first fragile fracture in the wall built to keep the truth out. And that was enough. If this story moved you even just a little, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us tell more true stories that deserve to be heard. The envelope sat untouched on the table between them, plain, white, government issued. Inside was a single sheet of paper, clinical, cold, absolute. Sarah had opened it hours ago. She'd already read the result 3 times, and yet it still didn't feel real. The words were right there in black and white. Probability of maternity, 99.9998%. Subject A, Sarah Bennett. Subject B, Jacob Fairchild, aka Noah Bennett. She hadn't cried, not yet. There was no room for tears in a moment this sharp. Jacob sat across from her, staring at the envelope as if it might explode. He hadn't asked to see the contents. Not out loud. But he knew. His body knew. Some part of him had always known. "I guess that's it," he said finally, voice brittle. Sarah leaned forward. "No, sweetheart, that's just the beginning." He looked at her, and for the first time in days she saw something breaking in him. Not resistance, but armor. That careful control he had kept for so long now gave way to something rawer, more human. "I don't know what to do with this," he admitted. "I don't know how to be Noah." You don't have to be him all at once, Sarah replied. You're still Jacob, too. Both names are part of your story. He glanced down at his hands. I feel like I stole someone's life, like I don't deserve either one. Sarah's voice softened. You didn't steal anything. You were taken, and you survived. But what if I'm not who you remember? He whispered. What if I never become that boy again? Sarah reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. I don't need you to become him, she said gently. I just want to know you, the person you are now. A long silence followed, the kind only truth can create. Then Jacob asked, almost like a child again, what was I like when I was little? Sarah smiled for the first time that day. You were obsessed with ants. You made me build entire obstacle courses for them on the kitchen floor. You wouldn't eat anything green unless it was gummy candy. And when you laughed, really laughed, you made this little hiccup sound like you couldn't quite catch your breath. A flicker crossed his face. He didn't say anything. But she saw it. The faint curve of his mouth, the shimmer in his eyes. A memory had stirred. Not a full one. Just a whisper. But it was there. Alan Fairchild was arrested without resistance. He didn't run. He didn't plead. He simply opened the front door when the officers arrived, hands already raised, eyes hollow. The news spread quickly, but quietly. Police preferred it that way when the charges involved a child. Abduction, identity fraud, obstruction of justice. The list was long and still growing. The local papers ran cautious headlines. Man accused of illegal adoption under investigation. But the story didn't stay local for long. Once the DNA match was confirmed and linked to a 13-year-old missing persons case, the media swarmed. Cameras lined the front lawn of the Fairchild residence for days. Neighbors were stunned. Alan had been the man who shoveled driveways in winter, who baked lemon bars for the block party, who sponsored school fundraisers, a widower who had rescued a child no one had questions about. Now, all anyone could talk about was how much they had missed. Sarah didn't attend the hearings. She didn't need to see him in an orange jumpsuit to feel justice stir. The courts would do their job. The laws would speak for the boy who had no voice for over a decade. Jacob, Noah, had asked not to be there either, but he watched the coverage. He listened to the reporters outside the courthouse. He read the statements from the police and the prosecutor. And then, late one night, he turned to Sarah and said, "Do you think he ever loved me?" The question hit like a slow, sinking weight. Sarah didn't rush to answer. When she did, it was with quiet honesty. I think he loved the version of you he built, but that doesn't make it right or real. Jacob looked down. I thought he was all I had. You were never alone, she said. Not really. The next day, Alan released a statement through his lawyer. He didn't deny the kidnapping. He called it an act of misguided mercy, said he had only ever wanted to give a child a chance. Noah didn't respond publicly. He didn't need to, because his very existence, his truth, was the loudest answer of all. In the following weeks, support poured in. Letters, emails, parents who had lost children sent prayers. Survivors of abduction reached out with quiet solidarity. Some spoke of nightmares. Others spoke of healing. But all of them carried the same message. You are not broken. You are not alone. You are more than what was taken from you. The first night Noah stayed at Sarah's apartment, neither of them slept. He'd brought a single duffel bag, clothes, toothbrush, a journal, a worn-out copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. That was all. 13 years of life folded into one bag, and a name he was still unsure belonged to him. Sarah had cleared out the guest room, setting fresh sheets, soft blankets, and leaving a note on the pillow that read, "You don't have to talk. You just have to be." He didn't say anything when he saw it, but later that night, he folded the note and put it in the journal he kept locked away in his bag. The first few days passed in quiet orbit. They moved carefully around each other like strangers pretending they weren't. Sarah made breakfast each morning, just like she used to, but now she asked first, "Toast or cereal? Coffee or tea?" He often shrugged, unsure of his own preferences. Sometimes they sat together on the couch and watched old movies. Once, she caught him mouthing the lines to Finding Nemo. She didn't say anything, just smiled. There were moments of progress, little flashes of something deeper, like when he laughed, really laughed, for the first time while watching a nature documentary, or the way he gently corrected her when she misquoted a line from Charlotte's Web and then looked stunned by the fact that he remembered it. But there were hard moments too. Once, he dropped a glass in the kitchen and froze, breath hitching as if expecting to be yelled at. Sarah knelt down silently, picking up the shards. "It's just glass," she said softly. "Not your fault." That night, he stayed in his room with the door slightly cracked open, for the first time since arriving. Another day, Sarah showed him an old photo album. "Only if you want," she said, but he opened it anyway. He stared at a picture of himself in a Halloween costume. Batman, age 5, chocolate smeared across his chin. His fingers traced the edge of the photo like it might speak if pressed hard enough. "I remember the cape," he whispered. It was the first memory he'd voluntarily shared. Sarah didn't press. She just nodded. "You wore it for a week straight." Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't empty. It was full of something sacred, something beginning. In therapy sessions, he told Dr. Carter, the child trauma specialist, that he felt like a blank page someone else had written on, like a story he hadn't agreed to live. "It's okay to rewrite it," Dr. Carter said. "You get to choose the next chapters." When she asked him where he wanted to begin, he said, "With her." Back home that evening, Noah knocked on Sarah's door before bed. "I don't want to sleep with the door closed," he said. Sarah swallowed a lump in her throat. "Then don't." She left her door open too, and in that small gesture, 2 doors open across a hallway, a mother and son began, not again, but anew. Noah stood in front of the mirror for a long time. He stared at the reflection, not out of vanity, but curiosity, as if the face looking back might blink differently, say something first, offer some clue. Jacob. Noah. 2 names. 1 person. And yet, some days he didn't feel like either. He'd spent his life memorizing a script. Son of Alan Fairchild, adopted in 2012, no memory of biological parents. That script had kept him safe. It gave him identity, stability, direction, but now the lines were blurred, and every time someone called him Noah, a quiet ache bloomed in his chest. He started writing. In the back pages of the journal, he drew a line down the center and made 2 columns, things I remember as things I've been told. On the left, a few scattered entries. Red baseball cap, a woman humming a lullaby, maybe Sarah, a blue tricycle, the word bug hotel, the smell of cinnamon in the mornings. On the right, a flood of memories from his time with Alan. First day of school, camping in Vermont, Christmas mornings with too many presents, a rule we don't talk about before. The contradiction was suffocating. At dinner one evening, he asked Sarah, "What was my favorite bedtime story?" She didn't even have to think. "Sarah, you made me read Harold and the Purple Crayon every night for 2 months. You insisted Harold looked like you." He laughed, a real one. "I can see it, round head, lost in his own drawings." Then he turned serious. "Sometimes I wonder if I made up everything, just to cope." Sarah reached across the table and gently touched his wrist. "You didn't make it up. You survived it." He looked away. "I feel like I don't belong anywhere, like I'm borrowing this life." "Noah, you are this life," she said. "Every choice you make from this point on belongs to you, no one else." The next week, he asked to visit the park where he disappeared. It was different now. New benches, new paint, a plastic jungle gym instead of the old metal one. But something in the air still felt familiar. As he walked toward the pond, he paused beside a tree with initials carved in its bark. He reached out, hand hovering over the grooves, and whispered, "Noah." And this time, it didn't sound like a stranger's name. That night, he added a new page to his journal. "I am both. I am neither. I am what comes next." And beneath it, he wrote one word, slowly, with intention. Noah. For the first time, the name felt like it fit. Not because someone told him, but because he chose it. Spring came late that year, but it came. Sarah and Noah sat on a weathered bench overlooking the Charles River. The water shimmered beneath a pale sun, ducks cutting through the surface like memory itself. Quiet, patient, always circling back. Noah had a sketchbook in his lap, something he'd picked up recently. He didn't call himself an artist, but Sarah noticed how his lines had begun to speak. Today he was drawing the river. Not from above, from within. Sarah sipped her coffee, the breeze lifting her hair gently. "You know, this is where I brought you the weekend before." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Noah nodded. I remembered, not clearly, just the sound of the water, the smell. They sat in silence for a long time. Then Noah said, "Do you think we'll ever feel normal? Sarah didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked at him, not the boy she lost, not the stranger she found, but the young man beside her now, his shoulders broader, his gaze steadier. I don't think we were meant to go back, she said finally, but we can go forward. He smiled softly. Forward's scary, she chuckled. So was being 6. You hated escalators. He laughed, a sound that landed gently, like sunlight. And in that moment, they weren't lost or broken. They were simply mother and son, sitting by a river, breathing the same air for the first spring in 13 years. Later that week, Sarah found a note on the kitchen table, folded neatly, resting beside her favorite mug. Gone for a walk, be back for dinner, Noah. Simple, ordinary. But her hands trembled holding it. It was the first time he'd signed his name that way, without hesitation, without apology. No longer Jacob, not erasing who he'd been, but choosing who he would become. When he returned that evening, he handed her a small gift bag. It's nothing big, he said. Inside was a blank notebook. On the cover, one word, us. She looked at him, eyes welling. You want to write it together? He nodded. You write the first half, I'll take the second. Sarah opened the book, heart full and fragile. There was no need for an ending, only beginnings, only the quiet, beautiful courage to keep going. And maybe someday, when someone asked Noah who he was, he wouldn't hesitate. He'd smile and say, I'm Noah Bennett, and this is where my story begins. If this story touched you, please consider supporting our team by subscribing to this channel. Share the video with someone who believes in the power of truth and family. Hit the like button to help others find this story. Leave a comment below. What moment moved you most? And would you want to hear part 2, the story of healing? Your voice helps stories like this live on.